Hello, my name is Anne Steen-Hansen and I live in Trondheim in Norway, where I am recording this lecture right now. I feel very, very honored being asked to give this plenary lecture. And actually, it's almost 2 years ago that I was asked to do this, and my mandate was quite open. I could speak about whatever I wanted. So after a short time of thinking, I found that the topic of how to obtain learning from fire investigations could be good and could be of interest to a broad audience. And it's a very practical topic. I've been involved in analysis of fire incidents for nearly 30 years, both as a researcher and as an expert witness in court. I've also read several reports from fire investigations from all over the world in connection with different projects. And I've learned a lot from that. And I see that there is much knowledge to be extracted from such analysis that the whole fire safety community should learn from. I want to acknowledge my co-authors, Karolina Storesund and Christian Sesseng, who has contributed to the paper that this lecture is based on. So when I use the term investigation of fires in this talk, it is with a broader perspective than in a criminal investigation, where the goal is to reveal if any criminal act has been performed. The goal of fire analysis can be focused on the fire development, function of fire safety measures, different kinds, human behavior, fire service intervention, fire behavior of construction elements, materials, etc., etc. It's only the fantasy that sets the limits. So in this lecture, I want to show you some of the knowledge we have obtained from investigating fires in Norway and how we believe this has contributed to an increased general fire safety level. So I will just jump directly to the conclusions. We claim that learning from fire investigations has increased fire safety in Norway. Utilizing information from analysis of fires is a cost-efficient tool for increasing the fire safety in society. And this information should also initiate research to close the knowledge gaps that occur in the investigation. And I also see that we should do much more of this, and that we need to develop good tools for sharing knowledge both nationally and internationally, and use the tools we already got. Investigation should also be a national responsibility, and therefore we recommend that a national fire investigation commission should be established in Norway, and that could be a good idea for other countries as well. This presentation is funded by the Norwegian Fire Research and Innovation Center, FRIC, where learning from fire investigation is one of the projects. So I first would like to present FRIC briefly to you. So this is actually not a physical center, it's more a large project that was established 2 years ago. FRIC covers a broad scope of topics, but is connected to fire safety in buildings and built environment mainly. We have got 5 years of funding from the Research Council of Norway and from our partners, and we hope for more funding after the first 5 years are finished. There are 3 academic partners in FRIC. It's Rise Fire Research Norway, which is the host institution with me as center director. It's Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and it's the research foundation SINTEF. So this is a strong research group. We also have 18 partners from industry and public administration. Most of them are Norwegian, but we also have some international partners. So if you're interested in reading more about FRIC, you can visit our website, which is stated at the bottom of this slide. So to the background for this lecture. The paper that accompanies this lecture can be found online, and it's shown to the right here. It has the same title as this presentation. Real fires are valuable objects for case studies in many branches of the fire scientific community. Investigation of fires and analysis of information from fires are useful tools for gathering experience and knowledge of characteristics of fires, how fires start, why they develop as they do, and why they don't develop in other ways. So the fire prevention work in many countries today has become more focused on making evidence-based decisions, that is, developing regulations and guidelines based on the state-of-the-art knowledge about different fire safety challenges and possible risk-reducing measures, instead of only expert opinions or even only subjective opinions. Knowledge and facts are requested from the fire safety community. And a higher focus on analyzing fires will also lead to a more proactive attitude. That is my claim, because the increased knowledge gained from real fires also will increase the awareness of possible new fire risks in the society and the dynamics of fires in general. So, connecting this to the main goal of FRIC, which is to provide improved evidence-based decision-making and solutions for fire safety and fire protection in the built environment. So then we think that learning from fire investigation is a perfect fit. I then want to say something about accident investigation in general, and I've only one slide on this topic, and that's of course not fair, for this is a really huge scientific area, but I try to condense it. So investigation of accidents is regarded as an important tool to obtain learning in different disciplines of the safety area, and this has systematically been implemented in high-risk industries like the chemical industry, petroleum industry, nuclear power plant industry, and the transport area like aviation transport, where you know that an accident will have very, very large consequences. So important issues when evaluating accidents are what happened and where did it happen, when did it happen? So just getting the story of the accident and what failed, what made the accident become as large as it did, and why did it happen? And can the underlying causes, the root causes, be identified? That is, the causes of the causes. And how can we prevent that similar accidents happen again? Accident investigation is a specific discipline, and several tools and methods for collecting and systematizing data exist. I will not go deeper into such methods here, but just stress the point that investigation in general requires specific expertise. So we need to remember that doing fire investigations. Several countries have established systems for investigations of fires, including systems for reporting, analysis of results, and dissemination of findings. For example, the US, Japan, UK, and Sweden, to mention some. Different certification systems for fire investigators do also exist in different countries. Oh, what types of information could be collected from fire investigations? As I said, it's a huge amount of different information. So depending on the mandate. Analyses that have been performed have given valuable knowledge about many topics related to fire science, for example, structural fire safety, reaction to fire behavior of materials and systems, fire development from start to end, human behavior in fire, and have also resulted in information that has been used to develop and improve fire management systems, amend regulations, make better routines for emergency preparedness, making firefighting efforts more effective, and so forth. So this, again, dependent on the fire investigations mandate. And the collected information can include topics like description of the fire object, how were occupants alerted, how did people behave, how did fire safety measures function or not function, and how did the fire service act, and also, of course, consequences, number of fatalities, injured person, material damage, impact on the environment, etc. And also if there were any relevant deviation from regulations, or if not, then maybe regulations should be revised. And an analysis should conclude with important points for learning, and what could be learned would be different for the different target groups. For example, criminal fire investigator would have other topics than fire and rescue service. Just want to say a little bit about the situation on investigating fires in Norway. So who are the actors? The police, the Norwegian police, is obliged to investigate every fire, and that is every, to reveal if there is any criminal act behind the fire incident. So the focus of the police is how and why the fire started, and they stop there. The Fire and Rescue Service is supposed to investigate fires that could lead to large consequences, to evaluate the fire preventive efforts. Insurance companies investigate fire incidents to reveal insurance fraud or any reasons for recourse claims. And the authorities may investigate fires to learn how to prevent similar accidents to happen in the future. And on the right here, you see the logos of several authorities that investigate fires. It's the Accident Investigation Board of Norway, who traditionally are investigating accident in the transportation sector, but they may also investigate fires in buildings from now on. It's the Directorate for Civil Protection that are responsible for the fire services in Norway. It's the Norwegian Building Authority and the Petroleum Safety Authority of Norway. And in addition to this, also researchers and private investigators and fire safety engineers may be involved in investigations, being hired by some of these other actors. When it comes to the required competence, there is no certification system for fire investigators in general in Norway. Of course, the police has their education. The police academy gives courses in fire investigation. Some are mandatory and some voluntary, but our impression is that the fire investigation education is quite limited. And there is no other teaching offered for other types of expertise, for example, fire safety engineers. I'm going to show you briefly some examples of large fire incidents where new and important knowledge has been gained through investigations. The fire in the Norwegian village Lærdal was analyzed by different parties and gave knowledge on fire spread mechanisms and ignition safety measures that prevented fire spread. It also gave important information about collaboration between different organizations, municipalities, and volunteers in a crisis situation. And that will surely be useful in future larger accidents where different organizations have to collaborate. And we were also reminded that fires like this can occur in Norway today and even in the winter. This was in January 2014. The Grenfell fire is still being analyzed, but has revealed information that it is relevant far outside the borders of the UK. So findings from the investigation so far has led to a proposed change in the guidelines to the fire safety regulations for facade systems in tall buildings in Norway. And this must be seen as a successful exchange of information between countries, although a tragic case. This photo is from a large fire at parking house at Stavanger Airport in Norway or January 1 year ago. This fire was investigated and analyzed by different groups, where Rise Fire Research made one of the investigations. There were several factors studied: the impact of electric cars. There are many electric cars in Norway, so many of the cars in this house were electric. Details of the construction, fire safety measures, intervention of the fire brigade, collaboration, possible negative impact on the environment, etc. So, and the Norwegian authorities are now funding a project where fire safety in parking houses is the topic. And this may lead to changes in regulations or guidelines if necessary, or it might not. So investigation from all these fires have resulted in a large amount of information that can be useful for prevention of future fires. Who could learn from this? Who should learn from this? I've tried to give an overview. So as the investigator, education, of course, it should be brought into education. Fire investigation would also be of interest to industry, both high-risk industry and industry that are manufacturing like construction products or safety products of any kind. Contractors should be interested. Police, obviously. Insurance company, also obviously. Authorities who would revise regulations, obviously. Fire service, that's for sure. And also fire safety engineers to use this information in their design, building design, for example. So for all these actors, the fires serve as examples for explaining the theory on, for example, fire dynamics, human behavior in firefighting. And it's easier to remember something if you have a history to connect the knowledge to. So telling the story about fires is important for learning and for remembering. And sharing knowledge means that others may learn from your fire. And fire safety is also, as you see, a highly multidisciplinary field where a broad spectrum of information could be of interest. So development of fire safety requirements in building regulations all over the world has been and still is reactive. And that means that the regulations often may be revised after experiences from fires with large consequences. So you see what is wrong and you try to correct it. And this has been a good strategy that has led to many improvements in the general fire safety level. So I will give you some historic examples from Norway, and I'll start in the middle aged here. So the first Norwegian fire regulation I know of was the national law of King Magnus VI from 1274. It contained a paragraph that regulated the street width in order to prevent fire spread between the wooden houses. And this was obviously a reactive response to negative experiences with city fires, which was a big problem in the older days with all the wooden buildings. So, and this requirement is still stated in Norwegian building regulations. Here you see figures showing how large the space, the minimum space between buildings should be, and that is to prevent or limit fire spread. So later in history, and also in our time, large accidents and disasters have led to many amendments to the Norwegian fire regulations. In May 1822, there was a fire in Greer church in Norway, and this was a wooden church from the 13th century. It was the first day of Pentecost, and the church was filled with people. And the fire was, according to the history, ignited outside of the church by accident, and it spread quickly in the old wooden construction. So in the chaotic situation, as you can see in the middle of this slide, many people got stuck behind the church doors that open inwards, and they did not manage to escape. So 113 people died in this fire, and it's the largest fatal fire accident on Norwegian ground. This fire resulted in a regulation that required that doors in churches and other public buildings shall open outwards, and also requirements to the minimum size of door openings were given. And this regulation came shortly after this fire. So this is an example for early regulation of evacuation safety in buildings. This is the Norwegian coastal city Ålesund, as it looked around 1900. A pretty city. In the large fire in Ålesund in 1904, 850 houses were destroyed. That's a lot. It was a small city. Houses in Norwegian cities at that time were commonly built of wood, as this was a material easy to use, cheap, and available. The fire broke out in the middle of a stormy winter night in January, and only one fatality was reported in its fire, and that was an old woman who escaped from her house, but she decided to go inside again to save some of her belongings, and that was the last thing she did. The fire spread quickly because of this heavy wind. A short time after this fire, an act that required buildings in Norwegian cities to be constructed of bricks was implemented to avoid future city fires. So looking on fire risk management, we can divide it in reactive, looking at past accidents, proactive, looking at present identification of fire hazard, and then predictive management, where you are trying to look forward to predict fire hazards. It has been claimed that there are very few new accidents, and by this is meant that although no accidents are identical to another, there will be many similarities. So learning from investigation of one accident could probably prevent others from happening. And I believe we are now moving into the predictive phase. Examples of fire safety related to large batteries, photovoltaic installations, tall wood buildings, hydrogen in vehicles, etc. And to be able to predict future hazards and prevent future fires, knowledge from the former investigated fires will be of great value. And at the same time, there has been a change in the risk analysis, the focus of risk analysis, and consequently also a regulation development. It has been moved from a purely technical perspective in the older days, where the cause of an accident was related to a machine, for example, to bring in the human factors, the human perspective, and then you had the interface between man and machine. Organization and systemic perspective have also been included, and that means that we now need to assess how everything is interconnected to understand how accidents occur. And this may also be reflected in the regulations. And the modern fire regulations also take prevention of smaller incidents into account and not only the large disasters. So I will now focus on fire safety in healthcare institutions and in residential buildings. In 1959, the Stalheim Hotel, a large wooden building, was destroyed in a fire where at least 23 people died. And learnings from this accident led to the implementation of a new fire regulation for hotels and health institutions in 1963, with requirements of, for example, automatic fire alarm systems, night guards, regular fire drills. So here it's both technical measures and organizational measures were collected in this regulation. But despite this, 3 severe fires occurred in nursing homes during the 1970s and early 1980s, causing a total of 23 fatalities. Then in 1986, the fire in Hotel Caledonian in Kristiansand in Norway caused 14 lost lives. And of course, these fires were not acceptable. All the fires were systematically investigated and analyzed and resulted in valuable knowledge for improvement of the fire safety in such types of premises. And this also, and this is important, this led to intensified research to find efficient fire safety measures to prevent future disasters. The topics of this research project included studies of fire detection and alarm, investigation of furnishings of buildings focused on upholstered furniture and mattresses, and analysis of fire and the fire safety level in healthcare institutions with focus on vulnerable people. And this also led to change in regulations. This photo is from an early project performed in 1980 with the aim of studying combustibility of mattresses and also detection of fires. So the systematic work in the 1980s resulted in a regulation of fire preventive measures, and fire inspection came into force in 1990. And according to this regulation, all Norwegian homes were required to install smoke alarms and manual extinguishing equipment. And Norway was one of the first countries in the world to implement such requirements. 10 years later, the impact of these requirements was evaluated, and the conclusion was that both measures were cost effective. It was estimated that a minimum of 10 lives were saved every year because of installed smoke alarms, and that around 50% of all fires in residents were extinguished with handheld extinguishing equipment. And this implies a considerable prevention of material losses. These topics have also been studied in more recent projects, in addition to studies of fire safety for people that are more vulnerable to fire than others. And fire safety in dwellings is one of the focus areas in FRIC, where fire behavior of furnishing and early detection of fire are 2 of the central topics. That brings me to analysis of fatal fires. Several studies of fatal fires have been performed in Norway, comprising fires from the 1970s until 2014. And you can see we have 3 projects which are marked with these dotted squares: 1970 to 79, fatal fires in the period 79 to 1992. And the last study we did was fatal fires between 2005 and 2014. And Norway is a small country with a population of approximately 5.4 million people. And this means that an annual number of fatalities is rather low, and small variations in the numbers means large percentual changes in this curve. The frequency of fatal fires could be regarded as an indicator of fire safety in the society. Reducing the number of fatalities in fires would imply an overall increase in the general fire safety level. That is my claim. Fires that cause loss of lives are normally thoroughly investigated by the police to reveal if there was any criminal act behind the incident. And that means that details describing these incidents are very often well documented. So it's a good basis for the study. So as you see, the number of fatalities has decreased over the last decades from a stable number between 50 and 70 here in the beginning to 40 and below for the last years. That is a decrease of 30%. That's quite considerable. But if we compare the number of fatalities with the number of inhabitants in Norway, we see an even more dramatic decrease because the population has increased in Norway over this long period. And so it's this green dotted line, and there you see it's starting from about 1.5 until 0.7 at the end here. And that is a decrease of about 50%, which is really amazing. So one hypothesis for the decrease may be that the results from analysis of fatal fires in combination with findings and knowledge from related research projects have made a positive contribution to the reduction of fire fatalities. And other factors have probably also had a positive effect on the fire death rates. For example, the decreasing number of tobacco smokers in the society. We also have improved healthcare systems for vulnerable people, fire safety education of children, communication campaigns, etc., etc. They have also probably contributed to this positive trend. Fire safety is a multifaceted area where the rate of success depends on collaboration between many disciplines. That's obvious. However, I do really believe that fire research is a very important part of the puzzle and has had and will still have a considerable positive effect on the fire safety development in our country. So we should keep up the pace. Another positive thing is that the number of young fire victims is very low in Norway, and it has been reduced over the last 3 to 4 decades. In this figure, we can't see the numbers of the earlier studies because we don't have data from those, but in the first part of in the early study, about 15% of the victims were children aged below 7. And in the last study of fires between 2005 and 2014, it showed that only 2% of the victims were aged under 10 years old. So that is a very, very positive trend. And I believe that the effect of early warning by smoke detectors was considerable to reduce the fatality. And in a recent study of smoke detectors in Norwegian homes, more than 90% had at least one functioning smoke detector installed, and that is very good. But the reduction in fatalities among children may also be due to several other factors, as changes within childcare, and because children nowadays are increasingly supervised by adults, spending less time entirely on their own. So there are also here different factors contributing to this. To obtain learning The results from analysis of fires from different countries should be made available for a broad audience through, for example, journal articles, reports, and databases. And some initiatives have been taken in this area. One is the Fire Exchange platform in Europe, where the exchange of experience from fire accidents is one of the identified areas for cooperation. Development of common fire terminology and fire statistics is another identified area. And as we see it, a prerequisite for making exchange of information and data meaningful, we need to speak the same language. And in Norway, 2 databases with information from fire investigations are underway. And we will have a look at those. So it's the databases Knitre, that means crackle in English, and Ulme, which means smolder in English. And Knitre was launched in November 2020 on a Facebook event. You can see a photo of it here. Here is the chief from the National Criminal Investigation Service who is making the opening speech. This database is focused on fire causes, and it contains public reports, articles, and also anonymized information from investigation reports. The target groups for this database is the police, fire services, insurance, research, education, and authorities. And you need to apply to get access to this information. It has a very efficient search function. I think it will be a very good tool for fire investigators in Norway. The other database Ulme, will be launched in June 2021, and that is a collaboration between Norwegian Fire Protection Association, relevant authorities, and also FRIC is involved. That has a broader scope. It has focus on buildings and fire development in buildings and should contain all relevant and available information on fires in buildings. Talk a little bit about the ongoing activity in our project now. We are now working on a study where the objective is to investigate preconditions from learning from fire investigations in Norway. We have interviewed different parties engaged in fire investigation and also collected information about how this topic is handled in other countries by contacting a few selected experts. Maybe some of you were contacted. The study will give an overview of the differences in the mandate for fire investigations, formal and informal practices and collaboration, promoters and barriers for learning, and also mechanisms for learning in organizations is a topic. So one of the goals of the project is to generate recommendations on how to promote learning from fires in Norway. And the report from phase 1 of the study will be finished this spring. It's in English. For the preliminary findings, we see that the collaboration between different actors often are based on personal relations. Someone in the police knows someone in the fire service. There are formal and informal collaborations with both contract and without contract, and there are lots of non-existing collaborations. International collaborations exist in different sectors, like insurance investigators have their own organization. Fire service has their organizations. The people we interviewed, they regard that the databases Ulme and Knitre will be useful tools, and they also think that a national fire investigation commission is a good idea. But we see that more education in fire investigation is needed and more fires should be analyzed. And also that trials with multidisciplinary investigations have been fruitful, and that is when the fire service, the police, and electricity authorities have performed investigations of fires together. So back to the conclusions again that you have already seen. So we should now go out and investigate more fires, share the information, perform the needed research, and thereby increase the fire safety in our society. And this should be done within some formal borders, like a national fire investigation commission should be established. And then, whoops.